I'll give you 100 million if you open the safe, the millionaire laughed. But Jesus Christ taught him a lesson. The laughter echoed off glass and steel on the 47th floor, sharp and confident, the kind that only comes from men who have never been told no. From the head of the table, the millionaire leaned back, fingers drumming beside a titanium vault built to defeat armies and hackers alike. $100 million, he said again, savoring the number as if money itself were a punchline. Around him, executives smirked. To them, this was entertainment, another reminder of who held power and who did not. The safe gleamed under white lights, flawless, sealed, untouchable. Impossible. That was the point. Near the door stood the stranger, work-worn jacket, calloused hands, dust on his shoes as if the city had not yet let go of him. He did not laugh. He did not argue. He simply listened. And when the room quieted enough to notice, something unsettled them. Not fear exactly, but the sense that the game had shifted without permission. Security held their breath. Screens blinked. The city hummed far below, unaware that a wager had been spoken that would cost far more than money. Then the stranger stepped forward. No threats, no tools, just a calm that felt out of place among men who live by leverage and force. A hand lifted not toward the men, but toward the cold face of the vault. In that moment, the executives felt it at once, the laughter fading, the air tightening, the strange suspicion that this was no longer about opening steel. Because some doors once touched do not reveal what is inside. They reveal who is standing outside. The 47th floor had become Grant Whitmore's favorite stage. Not because deals were signed there, those happened quietly elsewhere, but because this room allowed him to feel what he valued most: control. Floor-to-ceiling windows frame Manhattan, like a private exhibit, lights glittering below, as if the city itself existed to applaud his success. Tonight was not a board meeting. No assistants hovered. No agenda waited to be approved. This was an after-hours gathering, informal by billionaire standards, where expensive whiskey replaced spreadsheets and conversation drifted from acquisitions to amusement. The men around the table had all won the same game. Money no longer surprised them. Risk no longer scared them. What still entertained them was power, especially the power to remind others where they stood. The titanium safe dominated the far wall, polished and pristine, more expensive than most homes. Grant had insisted it be visible from every seat. It wasn't paranoia that drove him, it was symbolism. The vault represented permanence in a world he believed could be mastered by those ruthless enough to take it. Damian Cross lounged in his chair, amused eyes flicking between the vault and the stranger near the door. To Damian, this was already a story worth retelling another night when money proved it could bend reality. Victor Lane swirled his drink slowly, calculating not outcomes, but reactions. Ethan Hale smirked with inherited confidence, secure in the knowledge that consequences had never truly applied to him. Miles Carter watched quietly, the way men do when they've learned that silence often yields the highest returns. The stranger's presence had begun as a curiosity. Security hadn't flagged him as a threat. He hadn't demanded anything. He had simply appeared, asking about work, about carpentry, about fixing what others discarded. Grant had noticed him the way one notices a background detail, then sees the opportunity instinctively. A man like that could be useful, or amusing. That was how the idea took shape. A challenge, a spectacle, something to cut through the boredom of people who could buy anything except surprise. Grant enjoyed the way the room leaned toward him when he spoke. He enjoyed the quick glances exchanged when he raised the stakes. $100 million wasn't reckless to him, it was theatrical. He knew the vault wouldn't open. That certainty was the entire point. The offer was never meant to be honored. It was meant to be witnessed. From the edges of the room, staff watched with trained neutrality. Years of service had taught them when to look busy and when to disappear. Maria Alvarez kept her eyes lowered, moving quietly, wiping a table that was already clean. She had learned that in rooms like this, invisibility was a form of safety. What no one acknowledged, what no one planned for, was the way the air changed as the stranger listened. The jokes landed flatter. The laughter stretched a second too long. Beneath the polished arrogance, something unfamiliar stirred, the faint discomfort of being observed without being judged, of being measured by a standard that had nothing to do with wealth. To the men at the table, this was still a game, still entertainment. still under control. They had no idea the rules were already slipping out of their hands. Grant Whitmore formalized the challenge with a smile that carried no warmth. He straightened in his chair as if announcing terms in a courtroom rather than a lounge of glass and steel. $100 million. Wired instantly. No fine print. No delays. He made sure to say it slowly, letting each word sink in, not for the stranger's sake, but for the room. The executives reacted on cue. A low chuckle from Damien. A raised brow from Victor. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on the table, already enjoying the spectacle. To them, the number wasn't generosity, it was bait. An amount so absurd it stripped the offer of dignity and turned it into theater. They all understood the unspoken rule: the vault could not be opened. That was common knowledge. Military-grade titanium, redundant systems, biometric locks tied to Grant's body alone. The safe wasn't a test of skill. It was a trap dressed up as opportunity. The promise of money existed only to highlight how unreachable it was. Grant gestured toward the vault like a magician presenting an empty hat. He described its features with pride, not because anyone needed convincing, but because explanation itself was a form of dominance. The more impossible the task sounded, the more satisfying the outcome would be. Failure had already been decided, publicly. From the corner of the room, the stranger listened without interruption. He didn't step back. He didn't step forward. He simply stood there, absorbing every word, every laugh, every sideways glance that said, "This is where you learn your place." Security shifted their weight. One guard exchanged a look with another, the silent question passing between them. Is this necessary? But neither spoke. In rooms like this, silence was currency, and speaking without permission was costly. Maria paused near the doorway, cloth in hand, her reflection faint in the polished surface of the vault. She had seen this pattern before. Not this exact game, but the shape of it. Power offering generosity it never intended to give. Laughter used as a blade. Dignity treated like a luxury item. Grant repeated the terms once more, louder, now ensuring there were witnesses. He wanted this moment remembered. The night he offered a fortune to a man who could never claim it. The night his certainty went unchallenged. What the room mistook for confidence was something else entirely. It was cruelty wrapped in certainty. The pleasure of knowing the outcome before the question had even been asked. Yet as the challenge settled into the air, something subtle shifted. The stranger lifted his eyes not in defiance, not in fear, but in calm acknowledgement. Not of the money, not of the vault, of the men themselves. For the first time, the laughter didn't feel unanimous. Because while the offer had been designed to humiliate, humiliation only works when the target agrees to be small. And this man, standing quietly under the glow of white lights, gave no sign that he had come to beg. The game had been set. The rules were cruel by design. But cruelty, like certainty, has a weakness. It assumes control it does not truly possess. The man did not react the way they expected. He did not glance at the vault with hunger. He did not flinch at the number that had just been thrown at him like bait. He stood there as if time moved differently around him, hands relaxed at his sides, shoulders loose, posture unguarded. The contrast unsettled the room more than defiance ever could. Up close, there was nothing impressive about him by their standards. A faded work jacket, the kind worn by men who fixed what others discarded. Boots marked with dust, not neglect but use. His hands, several of them noticed the hands were rough, calloused, shaped by years of labor rather than leverage. These were not the hands of someone who signed contracts or moved markets. These were hands that built, repaired, carried weight. And yet when he lifted his gaze, conversation thinned. His eyes held no urgency, no calculation, no trace of the familiar desperation the wealthy had learned to expect from men without money. Instead, there was an unsettling clarity, as if he were present not for the outcome, but for the truth that would surface along the way. Victor Lane shifted uncomfortably. He couldn't explain why, but the stranger's calm irritated him. Damien forced another laugh, louder than necessary, trying to restore the mood. Ethan scoffed under his breath, dismissing the man as a performer who didn't yet understand the joke was on him. Grant watched more closely. He had dealt with confidence before. He had crushed it, bought it, bent it. But this was something else. The stranger wasn't posturing. He wasn't playing along. He looked at Grant not as a gatekeeper, not as a benefactor, but as a man, simply a man. And that look, unfiltered by fear or admiration, landed heavier than insult. Security noted it too. One guard straightened, instinctively alert, though no threat had been made. The air felt charged, as if something unspoken had entered the room and refused to be ignored. Near the wall, Maria paused in her work. She had seen countless executives pass through this. Floor had learned to measure them by shoes and voices and the way they looked past her. This man did not look past anyone. When his eyes briefly met hers, there was no surprise in them, no evaluation, only recognition, as if she had always been visible. The stranger took a step forward, slow and deliberate, not toward the vault, but toward the space between the men and their certainty. His presence carried a strange weight, not oppressive, but grounding, like standing on solid earth after years on glass. He spoke at last, and his voice was calm, steady, unraised. It carried without effort, not because it was loud, but because it was sure. In that moment, something shifted beneath the polished confidence of the room. The challenge no longer felt like a game designed by the powerful. It felt like an invitation, one they had not anticipated, and one they were no longer fully in control of. They had expected a beggar. What stood before them was a carpenter, and none of them could explain why that distinction suddenly mattered so much. The question came without force, without accusation, without the sharp edge the room was used to recognizing as threat. Why offer something you never intend to give? It was spoken evenly, almost gently, yet it landed like a dropped glass in a silent room. For a fraction of a second, no one reacted. The words hovered between the vault and the table, unfamiliar, inconvenient. Grant blinked, the smile still fixed on his face, as if his mind needed an extra beat to register what had just happened. Questions were not part of the script, especially not questions that cut inward. Damien was the first to laugh, but it sounded thinner than before. "That's rich," he muttered, glancing around for support. Victor frowned, irritation creeping in. Ethan shook his head, dismissive, as though the man had misunderstood the nature of the game. Miles said nothing, watching Grant carefully. Grant leaned forward. "What did you say?" His tone was calm, but it carried an edge, the subtle warning of a man unused to being interrupted. The stranger didn't retreat. He didn't raise his voice. He simply repeated himself, slower this time, as if clarity were an act of respect. "If the vault cannot be opened, then there is no risk to you. The money is not an offer. It's a prop." The word prop landed hard. A few of the executives shifted in their chairs. The laughter had stopped entirely now. The room, once loud with confidence, felt suddenly exposed, like a stage with the lights turned on too early. Grant straightened, irritation flashing across his face before he smoothed it away. "This is entertainment," he said. "No one is forcing him to stand here." The stranger nodded slightly, acknowledging the statement without accepting it. "Entertainment that depends on humiliation," he replied. "A reminder to those you consider lesser that the distance between you is absolute." The power in the room tilted just slightly, but enough to be felt. Victor scoffed. "So now we're getting a lecture." "No," the stranger said calmly. "Just an observation." That was what unsettled them most. He wasn't pleading. He wasn't condemning. He wasn't trying to win. He was describing the situation as if it were already decided, as if the truth did not require permission to be spoken. Maria, still near the wall, felt her breath catch. She had heard countless conversations on this floor, arguments, negotiations, threats disguised as kindness. But she had never heard anyone name the cruelty so plainly, so quietly in front of the men who wielded it. Grant felt something tighten in his chest. The question had done what no protest ever had. It had removed the spectacle and revealed the intent underneath. The challenge no longer felt clever. It felt exposed. "You came here looking for work," Grant said sharply. "And now you're questioning my generosity." The stranger met his gaze. Generosity is only generous when it can be given. Silence followed. Not the comfortable silence of agreement, but the strained kind that presses against the ears. The kind that forces reflection, even when reflection is unwelcome. For the first time that night, the balance of the room was uncertain. The money was still there. The vault was still sealed. Grant still held authority. And yet, with a single question, the rules had shifted. The game had been designed to humiliate one man. Instead, it had revealed something far more dangerous. The truth had entered the room, and it was not impressed by power. The stranger's eyes drifted not toward the men, but toward the vault. It stood against the far wall like an altar of certainty, its surface flawless, reflecting the room back at itself. For years, it had been the quiet centerpiece of Grant Whitmore's domain, a monument to control disguised as security. Everyone in the room knew what it represented, even if no one ever named it. The stranger did. "What do you keep in there?" he asked, his voice calm, "that you consider truly valuable?" The question didn't sound philosophical. It sounded practical, almost ordinary. And that was what made it dangerous. Grant gave a short, dismissive laugh. "Documents, emergency cash, assets that can't be replaced overnight." He gestured toward the vault as if listing items on a balance sheet. "Things that matter." Damien nodded in agreement. Victor added insurance against chaos. Ethan smirked. Miles said nothing, already calculating the worth of what might be stored behind the door. The stranger listened without interruption, then inclined his head slightly. So he said things. The word landed softly, but it stripped the grandeur from everything they had just described. Grant's jaw tightened. Those things took decades to build, and decades can build many things, the stranger replied, including prisons. A ripple of discomfort moved through the room. He continued, still facing the vault. "Money can be replaced, contracts can be rewritten, even reputations can be rebuilt with time. But some things cannot be recovered once they are lost." Victor crossed his arms. "Like what?" The stranger turned, meeting their eyes one by one. "A clean conscience. The ability to sleep without fear. A home that isn't empty. Children who still answer your calls. The knowledge that no one suffered so you could stand where you stand." The room grew quieter with each word. Grant felt at first a pressure behind his ribs, an old ache he had learned to ignore. He glanced instinctively toward the windows, toward the city below, as if distance could muffle the effect of what was being said. "That's philosophy," Ethan scoffed. "It doesn't keep the lights on." "No," the stranger replied gently, "but it tells you why the lights matter." Maria had stopped moving altogether, now cloth folded in her hands. She had cleaned this room for years, wiped fingerprints from glass that never seemed to notice her presence. Yet she understood instantly what he meant. She knew the weight of what couldn't be locked away. The prayers whispered in silence, the sacrifices no ledger ever recorded. Grant straightened. "Why should any of that be more valuable than what's in that vault?" he demanded. "Everything in there protects what I've built." The stranger's gaze returned to the safe, thoughtful. "What you protect most," he said, "reveals what you fear most." No one laughed this time. The vault, once a symbol of invincibility, now felt exposed. Not because it could be opened, but because its purpose had been named. It guarded wealth, yes, but it also guarded distance. It kept consequences out and control in. The stranger stepped back, giving the men space to sit with the question. He had not accused. He had not demanded. He had simply placed a mirror between them and the steel they trusted more than people. And for the first time, the vault did not look like security. It looked like a confession. The game was no longer about whether the safe could be opened. It was about what had been sealed behind it for years, and whether anyone in the room was ready to face that truth. The stranger did not raise his voice. He did not pace the room or point an accusing finger. He simply turned slowly and looked at them one by one, as if reading names etched where no one else could see. He began with Damien Cross. "You bought the Riverbend Apartments 3 winters ago," the stranger said calmly. "You tripled the rent within 60 days. 400 families were forced out. 2 of them slept in their cars until spring." Damien laughed sharply. "That's public information. Market forces." "One of those families," the stranger continued uninterrupted, "had a mother with 3 children. The youngest caught pneumonia after weeks without heat. You never heard about her because she didn't have a lawyer." Damien's laughter died mid-breath. His mouth opened, then closed. He sat back slowly, color draining from his face. The stranger turned to Victor Lane. 14 workers have died in your facilities," he said. 14. Victor's chair scraped as he pushed back. "Those were accidents. Investigations cleared us." "Accidents made inevitable," the stranger replied, "when you cut safety budgets by 40% to satisfy investors. 14 widows learned what your savings cost." Victor's protest rose, then faltered. His hands clenched at his sides, knuckles white. Ethan Hale leaned forward, scoffing. You're reciting headlines. Anyone can do that. The stranger looked at him not harshly, but with a sadness that unsettled him. You inherited a company built by underpaid labor, he said. You expanded it by pressuring sales teams into impossible quotas and silencing those who spoke up. You call it growth. Your employees call it fear. Ethan's smirk vanished. He stared down at the table, jaw tight. Finally, the stranger faced Miles Carter. You've calculated every risk, he said. Every loophole. Every advantage. You know exactly how much you can take without being caught. Miles said nothing. He had learned long ago that silence was armor, but something in the stranger's gaze slipped past it. You invest in everything, the stranger continued, except people. You know the price of a life. You've never asked its value. Miles swallowed. For the first time that night, his eyes flickered, not with calculation, but with doubt. Grant Whitmore had remained quiet, watching the room unravel. He felt the shift before the stranger spoke his name. The air seemed to tighten around him. You built this empire, the stranger said, not only to win, but to never feel powerless again. Grant stiffened. You bought the building your family was evicted from, the stranger continued. Not because it was a good investment, but because you wanted to own the place where you once felt small. Grant's breath caught. You've surrounded yourself with people, the stranger said softly, yet you go home alone. Your children stopped calling. Your wife stopped waiting. And every night you sit in rooms like this protecting things that cannot love you back. Silence fell thick, undeniable. No one laughed. No one interrupted. Because these were not accusations thrown into the dark. They were truths spoken with precision, each one landing where it hurt most. This was not humiliation. It was exposure. And for the first time, the men in the room understood something terrifying. The stranger did not know these things by research or rumor. He knew them the way a surgeon knows where to cut. Cleanly, exactly, and without mercy for illusion. Grant Whitmore broke the silence with a sound that tried to be a laugh and failed halfway through. Enough, he said, rising from his chair. The confidence in his voice was strained, now stretched thin by truths he could not unhear. You've made your point. You know things. Congratulations. He gestured sharply toward the vault. But none of that open steel. So let's finish this. The Titan vault stood motionless, indifferent to emotion, its surface cold and flawless. Grant stepped closer, placing himself beside it, reclaiming territory. You wanted the challenge, he said. Here it is. Open it. Or admit you can't. The stranger did not answer immediately. He approached the vault slowly, not with hesitation, but with intention. Each step felt measured, as if time itself had slowed to observe. The executives watched closely now, no longer amused, no longer relaxed. Even security leaned forward instinctively, alert hands hovering near earpieces. The stranger placed his palm against the steel. Nothing happened. Grant exhaled sharply, relief and triumph mixing in his chest. That's it, he said too quickly. This isn't a sermon hall. This is the lights flickered. Just once. Brief, almost imperceptible, but enough. The biometric panel illuminated, then dimmed, then flared again. Lines of code raced across the screen faster than any system diagnostic Grant had ever seen. The soft hum of the vault deepened into a low vibration that resonated through the floor. What's happening? Damien whispered. Security reached for their comms. We're seeing anomalies, one guard muttered, eyes locked on his tablet. That shouldn't be possible. The scanner chirped. Once, twice, then began cycling through numbers on its own digits, shifting as if searching for something it could not define. Grant stepped back, heart pounding. That system is isolated, he snapped. There's no network access, no override. The stranger did not move his hand. Victor's breath came shallow. Ethan stood frozen, mouth slightly open. Miles stared at the panel, his mind racing through every explanation he had ever trusted and finding none that fit. Then it happened. A sound not loud, not dramatic, but unmistakable. A click. Soft, precise, final. The vault door released. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Then slowly, impossibly, the Titan vault door swung open. Grant stumbled back as if struck. No, he whispered. That's not, there's no inside the vault lay exactly what they expected, and yet could no longer see the same way. Stacks of cash, velvet cases of jewelry, sealed documents, wealth compressed into perfect order. The stranger withdrew his hand. Impossible, Victor breathed. Grant's knees weakened. He grabbed the table to steady himself, eyes fixed on the open vault. This can't be real, he said hoarsely. There's no physical explanation. The stranger turned to him, voice calm, unshaken. You said it was impossible, he replied. You believed that because your faith was in systems you built. He stepped aside, allowing them to see the contents fully. But nothing made by human hands is beyond being undone. Silence swallowed the room. No celebration followed, no cheers, no disbelief-laced laughter. The miracle did not feel like victory. It felt like exposure. The vault was open. But the thing that terrified them most was not the failure of steel. It was the sudden, unbearable awareness that the same hand capable of opening titanium had already opened something far more vulnerable, their hearts. And unlike the vault, those had been sealed for years. The room did not erupt in chaos the way anyone might have expected. No alarms blared, no guards rushed forward. The open vault did not inspire celebration or panic. Instead, it drew a silence so heavy it felt deliberate, as if the moment itself demanded stillness. The stranger reached into the vault and lifted a stack of bills. He held it loosely without reverence, the way one might hold scrap paper. The money did not change his expression. It did not slow his breathing. To him, it carried no weight. This, he said quietly, is paper. The words cut deeper than shouting ever could. Grant Whitmore stared at the money in the stranger's hand, his mind scrambling for footing. He had imagined this moment so many times, victory, humiliation, applause, but never this. Never calm. Never truth spoken without anger. For this paper, the stranger continued, you traded your nights. For this paper, you traded families. You will never meet homes. You will never enter pain you chose not to see. He let the bills fall. They scattered across the marble floor, a sound barely audible, yet it echoed through the room like a verdict. Grant's chest tightened. His first instinct was to protest, to defend himself with logic and numbers and context. But none of it rose to the surface. What stood before him was not accusation, it was clarity. The stranger turned slightly, allowing the open vault to remain in view. You believed the steel protected you, he said. You believed that if you could lock this away, you could lock away consequence as well. Damien felt his throat close. Victor's hands trembled at his sides. Ethan's eyes burned as he stared at the floor. Miles finally looked away from the vault, the calculations in his mind dissolving into something he did not know how to quantify. I did not come to condemn you, the stranger said, his voice steady. You condemn yourselves every night you choose profit over people and tell yourselves it is necessary. Grant swallowed hard. He had faced lawsuits, hostile takeovers, public scrutiny. None of it compared to this moment, the unbearable precision with which his life was being named. You have built empires, the stranger continued, but you have not built peace. You have secured assets, but you have not secured love. You have gained the world and still lie awake, wondering why it feels empty. Grant felt tears burn behind his eyes. He turned away instinctively, ashamed of the weakness. But there was nowhere to hide. The truth had already seen him. The stranger's gaze softened, not with approval, but with something far more unsettling, compassion. Judgment does not always arrive as fire, he said. Sometimes it arrives as honesty spoken when there is still time to change. The vault remained open behind him, its contents exposed, stripped of mystery. What once symbolized safety now looked small, finite, fragile. The stranger took a step back, creating space. He did not demand repentance. He did not issue threats. He let the truth stand on its own, knowing it was enough. And it was. Grant's knees gave way. He did not fall dramatically. He simply sank into the chair, shoulders, shaking breath, shallow. The others watched him not as a titan of industry, but as a man finally seeing the cost of everything he had protected. The miracle had already passed. This was something far more terrifying. The judgment was complete, not because thunder had spoken, but because the truth had been heard. Grant Whitmore tried to speak. Nothing came out. The room watched as the man who had never hesitated, who negotiated billion-dollar deals without blinking, sat frozen hands gripping the edge of the table, as if it were the only solid thing left. His breathing grew uneven, not panicked, controlled at first, the way powerful men try to manage weakness when it appears uninvited. The stranger said nothing. That silence did what no accusation could. It left Grant alone with the truth he had spent decades outrunning. Images pressed in without permission, a penthouse lit only by city glow, a phone screen that stayed dark, a dining table long enough for 10, used by one. Children whose voices had once filled his house, now reduced to carefully worded emails. A marriage that ended not with shouting, but with exhaustion, his wife packing quietly while he took a call in the next room. Grant's chest tightened. He rose abruptly as if standing might restore balance, but his legs failed him halfway. He caught himself on the chair knuckles, white breath shaking now, no longer controlled. This isn't, his voice cracked. He stopped swallowing hard. This isn't who I am. The stranger finally spoke, his tone, neither harsh nor comforting. It is who you became. That was it. The last defense collapsed. Grant took a step forward, then another. The men around the table stared stunned as he lowered himself to the floor. No cameras, no witnesses he could control. Just polished marble beneath his knees and the unbearable clarity of being seen. He knelt, not dramatically, not ceremoniously, simply because standing had become impossible. I don't know how to fix this, Grant said, his voice breaking completely now. I don't know how to undo what I've done. Tears streaked down his face unchecked. I chased things that never filled me. I hurt people I'll never meet. I traded everything for nothing. Damien looked away, shaken. Victor's jaw trembled. Ethan pressed his palm to his mouth, eyes wide. Miles stared at Grant as if seeing him for the first time, not as a force but as a warning. Grant lifted his head, eyes red searching. Tell me what to do, he said, the words barely audible. Tell me how to change. The stranger stepped closer and placed a hand on Grant's shoulder. It was a simple gesture. No spectacle, no lightning. Yet the room felt it, the weight of authority paired with infinite restraint. Start by giving up what you don't need, the stranger said quietly. Return what was taken unjustly. Pay what you avoided. Treat every worker as if they were your brother. Measure success by the lives you restore, not the numbers you protect. Grant nodded, tears falling freely now, not in shame alone, but in relief. For the first time in years, someone had not admired him, feared him, or negotiated with him. Someone had told him the truth and stayed. You will not fix this overnight, the stranger continued. You will stumble, but if you choose differently tomorrow than you did yesterday, the direction of your life will change. Grant bowed his head. Around him, the room felt transformed. The vault stood open, forgotten. The money lay scattered on the floor unnoticed. What mattered now was this: the moment a man accustomed to commanding others finally surrendered control, not to power, but to truth. And in that surrender, something irreversible occurred. Grant Whitmore did not become smaller. For the first time, he became real. The stranger did not pull Grant to his feet. He did not pronounce forgiveness with ceremony or declare an ending to what had begun. Instead, he allowed the moment to breathe, as if understanding that real change required space to choose space to count the cost. This is not a sentence, he said at last. It is an invitation. Grant remained kneeling, listening, as though every word might disappear if he looked away. You asked how to change, the stranger continued. Change does not begin with words or intentions. It begins with restitution. His voice was steady, unhurried. Sell what you do not need. Return what was taken unjustly. Pay what you avoided paying. Raise wages until no one who works for you must choose between rent and food. Victor flinched. Damien swallowed hard. Ethan's shoulders slumped. Miles exhaled slowly, already understanding the scale of what was being asked. This will cost you, the stranger said plainly. It will cost profits. It will cost comfort. It will cost reputation among those who prefer the old way. Grant nodded, tears streaking his face. He did not ask for exceptions. Create a fund, the stranger went on, not as charity that keeps distance, but as repair. Share ownership with those who built this company with their hands and years. Open your books. End the practices that depend on fear. Replace them with justice. The stranger turned to the others, meeting each gaze without accusation. Each of you has your own work to do, families to compensate, systems to rebuild, harm that cannot be undone but can be acknowledged. No one argued. The truth had already exhausted resistance. Then the stranger added something unexpected. I will give you 1 year. Grant looked up sharply. 1 year, the stranger repeated. Not for performance, not to impress me. I will not be watching your press releases. A pause. I will be watching your choices. A tremor passed through the room. A year was generous. A year was terrifying. In 1 year, the stranger said, I will return, not to judge you, but to see what you have built. If I find transformation that is real, your wealth will have begun to serve its true purpose. If I find that this moment was only fear that faded, then your wealth will become its own prison. Grant bowed his head again, understanding. This was not mercy without consequence. It was mercy with responsibility. Why give us time? Ethan asked quietly. Why not take everything now? The stranger's expression softened. Because change forced by loss rarely lasts. Change chosen freely can reshape a life. Maria stood frozen near the wall, tears in her eyes. She had seen promises made before, grand words spoken in rooms like this. But this was different. This was not applause-seeking generosity. This was instruction that demanded humility. The stranger stepped back, creating distance returning agency. You do not need me to tell you every step, he said. If you have understood what happened here, you already know what must be done. Grant rose slowly to his feet. He did not look powerful now. He looked resolved. We'll do it, he said hoarsely. Not as a vow shouted into the air, but as a commitment anchored in fear and hope intertwined. The stranger nodded once. The invitation had been given. The year had begun. And for the first time, the men in that room understood that redemption, true redemption, was not free. It was costly, but it was possible. Morning came differently to the 47th floor. The vault remained open, but no one looked at it anymore. What mattered now stood in the doorway, employees arriving for an emergency meeting they had not been told how to prepare for. Executives stood beside janitors. Security guards stood beside analysts. For the first time, the hierarchy blurred. Grant Whitmore entered last. He did not take the head of the table. He stood among them. His voice was steady, not rehearsed. He spoke of a night he could not fully explain and did not attempt to dramatize. He spoke instead of decisions that would begin immediately. Profit sharing across every level. Wages raised to dignity, not survival. A transparent fund dedicated to repairing the harm the company had caused. Housing, healthcare, education, guided by the people who had lived the consequences. A murmur rippled through the room. Skepticism, hope, fear, disbelief. Then Grant did something no one expected. He asked a name. Maria Alvarez hesitated, thinking she had misheard. For 12 years, she had cleaned that floor without being acknowledged. Now every eye turned toward her as Grant waited patiently until she spoke. Maria, she said softly. Grant repeated it. Maria. He apologized not as a performance but as a reckoning, for walking past her thousands of times without seeing her, for benefiting from systems that relied on her invisibility. He offered her a role not symbolic, not tokenized, but real authority, helping lead a new division focused on human dignity and community repair. Maria's hands trembled as she nodded. Tears ran freely, not because of the promotion, but because someone had finally seen her. The change did not stop there. Damien sold properties once used to displace families and rebuilt them as affordable homes. Victor overhauled safety systems at immense cost, meeting widows and children he had once kept at a distance. Ethan dismantled cultures of fear inside his company, choosing slower growth over silent suffering. Miles paid what he owed publicly and began working to close the loopholes he had once mastered. Not everyone applauded. Old allies scoffed. Markets reacted. Headlines questioned motives. Some called it weakness. Others called it strategy. But the men did not stop. They worked with their hands. They showed up. They listened. They made mistakes and corrected them in daylight. Slowly, stories replaced rumors. Employees told their families. Communities noticed consistency. What began as 5 men responding to one night became something larger, a movement of leaders choosing repair over reputation. And in quiet ways, the stranger's promise held true. He returned not always as a man in workwear, not always recognized. He was present in reconciled families, in safer job sites, in homes rebuilt, in paychecks that reached kitchens instead of vaults. He was there when Grant called his children and listened without defending himself. He was there when Maria led with courage rather than bitterness. Years later, the vault still stood, but inside it lay only a single note written in simple ink. The true treasure is love. Everything else is just metal and paper. The city moved on. Most people never knew what had happened on the 47th floor. Some called it a parable. Others called it coincidence. But the effects were undeniable. Because the most difficult thing to open is not a titanium vault. It is the human heart. And that night it opened. This story reminds us of a truth many people spend a lifetime avoiding. Wealth, status, and control can lock us in just as tightly as any steel vault. The miracle was not that a safe was opened, but that hardened hearts were. Jesus Christ did not arrive with thunder or punishment. He arrived with truth, asking questions that expose what really mattered. The lesson is clear and deeply practical. For today's world, success without compassion leads to emptiness. But humility paired with responsibility can transform lives, families, and entire communities. Each of us holds a kind of vault: our time, our resources, our influence. What we choose to protect reveals who we are. When we choose dignity over profit, people over pride, and love over fear, change becomes possible at every level of life. If this message spoke to you, please subscribe to our channel, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and share this video so others can be encouraged. More powerful stories of faith and transformation are coming.